Hello and welcome to the Overly Animated Podcast, where we take animation seriously. We provide fan-oriented and analytic discussions on a variety of animated shows, movies, and anime, including Steven Universe, Gravity Falls, and Rick and Morty. I'm Dylan Hysen, and today I'm joined by Delaney Stovall.
Hello.
This is the first of our Rick and Morty coverage. We're going to be talking about every new episode of Rick and Morty's second season, which has just started airing on Adult Swim. We're regularly covering it along with Gravity Falls, Steven Universe, and eventually some other shows as well. And you can check out everything about us and the podcast at overlyanimated.com. Just a note, our podcast content rating are specific to the show in which we are covering. Rick and Morty, it is an adult show, so this podcast is not necessarily appropriate for younger audiences, although I doubt we're going to be cursing up a storm on this, although they do on the show sometimes.
It'll just be quoting.
Just quoting the explicit show, yes.
Quoting Rick, that's it.
Anyway, let's get into Rick and Morty. So this is our first time podcasting on Rick and Morty. And this is a little bit different from us. We were previously an Avatar, Last Airbender, and Legend of Korra podcast, and we've since covered Gravity Falls and Steven Universe so far here. And this is the first adult comedy animation show we're covering. So I'm a little uncertain of how it's going to go here, but there's a lot of depth, I think, to this show. So I think we can get some good discussion out of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's generally talk us and Rick and Morty for a second. Delaney, you recently marathoned Rick and Morty, right?
Yes.
So what did you think when you were marathoning it? Like, had you heard of it before, and what do you think of the show now and stuff?
I'd never heard of it before, except the more I don't know if it's just because I'm familiar with it now, but the opening, like Rick and Morty, like the weird lightning, like that's familiar for some reason, and maybe I've seen that before. So wasn't familiar with it at all until like you mentioned it, and then I was like, I'm gonna watch it, and it's like I immediately loved it. Like the first episode, I was like, this is so great. The show is so bad, and I love it. And by bad, I mean, you know how you talk about, you know, like a kind of inappropriate adult show. Like it's so great, but there's actually like some depth to it. Like I think I got like halfway through the first season, I was like, wait, there's like plot. I'm amazed.
I didn't watch it either when it first aired last year, but or I guess it started in December of 2013 and kind of split through its airing. Interesting. I think they're going straight through this season. Yeah. I would hope so. But got caught up on it in fall semester last year from college apartment mates. Kind of a perfect college show to watch with everyone, and it's so distinctive and pretty incredible when watching it for the first time. There's so many like classic episodes in its 11 episode first season, and I think it's the funniest show on television. I think it's one of the best shows on television, and it's totally deserving of coverage, talking about it with all the other great, more like a dramatic animated series. And we're talking about this with the best series on television. I think it's just so it's so clever and ambitious, I would say. And this is a perfect example of how ambitious it is. And it's a great episode to talk about for the podcast, because it's like kind of, I don't know if it's groundbreaking in terms of animation, but it's certainly interesting in how they apply a varying style of animation here. So we're going to talk A Rickle in Time, the first episode of season 2. So we watched it, I think, twice now. It aired last night on Adult Swim. I'm aware the first 2 episodes of the season have leaked, and we're going to record our second one ahead of time, but it's going to be put up during the normal coverage slot, and we'll be talking about this every Monday after it airs at Sunday nights. Delaney, what did you think of A Rickle in Time?
It was great. I think it lived up to, I wouldn't say like, I don't know how to like describe it as hype, but like, you know, kind of the build up I was expecting, or kind of the episode I was expecting after having the finale. And, you know, and I love that it started just immediately after we ended on the finale. Like, that's so great. Because rarely do shows, especially animated shows, do that. Like, that's not something that usually happens. It's very much now it's 6 months, or, like, even a day, or, like, it's not literally the second. Granted, it's 6 months, but I don't know. It's funny, like, that twist. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it was...
Like, it's odd, like, because... It's not immediately after, but it is.
I definitely didn't expect them to continue that plot line right away. This isn't the type of the show that is super continuous. There's elements of continuity to it, but it's not an episodic show.
Yeah, no, not at all. And it's really, like, to get this in the first episode is great. just the humor in this episode is just so good. And then also just the design of like they really play around with like just the visuals of this episode, and it's nuts. And we've played with time before in this. I mean, it's kind of a thing that our infinite, times and things like that. We've played a lot with that in the show, and to have it like all at once in an episode was pretty great. And I mean, any more Rick just bumbling around is always great anyway, which is essentially the whole show. But I don't know, just the humor was really on point. I just love having more of her name's Summer, right? I don't know why.
Yeah, no, she was not really a character last season, so apparently she'll be more of a character this season.
And having more of her is great.
Yeah, you saw the first season more recently than I did. Does this hold up to the first season humor wise?
I'd say so. It's not necessarily like I wasn't like laughing the entire episode, but I will definitely say that the humor with the mom and the dad were a lot like it was a lot funnier and better than like a lot of the other scenes that we had with the parents in the first season. Granted, that's also just more of like build up and like getting to know the characters, but I did think it was like in that regard it was this lived up to that or was even better than. I guess just it was on level with like with Rick and Morty and all of them. But I mean, it wasn't necessarily like the most hysterical episode or anything. Like it wasn't. I don't think it was funny necessarily like throughout, but they definitely like hit their cues pretty well. And
yeah, I think it's had its moments in terms of humor, but I think overall I remember it being, and I'll rewatch the show probably before maybe our third podcast on it. I remember it being slightly funnier than this episode was. I don't think the humor is necessarily the strong suit of this, right?
I do think it's like clever though. Like this episode's really clever.
It's really so the A plot is the really standout one here, and I really did enjoy this one. I think it's a little bit away from being an all-time classic. I'm not sure which episodes specifically of season 1 are all-time classics. Probably some of in the second half of it. But this is the splitting of the screen and the different time realities is so interesting and so well done, and it's just really engaging from a plot perspective and from a character perspective. They do a really good job of pursuing this kind of interesting on its own plot while also furthering the kind of shallow characters that they have. They're kind of introducing Summer as a new companion to the Rick doctor, and having her being a legitimate presence, and the conflict between her and Morty of trying to impress Rick, and furthering Rick's character kind of because he has this one serious moment in the episode when he's falling down. He doesn't think he's gonna get the bracelet, so it's nice to have like a genuine moment with him, I guess, in the midst of his ridiculousness of a character.
The 164th like moment of genuine Rick.
Yeah, it very much feels like moments when you get the real like emotional moments with the Doctor and Doctor Who after him just being absurd the entire time. Yeah, but I think this is very, very, very good. I don't think the B plot was like really good, but at the same time, compared to the A plot, it was not there for me, I guess.
There's also a lot.
It was also a lot. I think they maybe spent too much time there. I'm not sure. But apparently this episode went through a lot of production difficulties, which you can imagine from the varying realities in the A-plot.
I don't want to imagine how many like sketches and like God, like watching it is hard.
Yeah, I mean the thing with the show is that they animate it. It's like they use a certain animation software. It's not shipped off to South Korea like Korra or Gravity Falls or even The Simpsons is. I think they make it in-house or whatever in-house is. But it's obviously not as high quality animation as those shows, but it still must be a lot of production difficulties on their end. So I think the gimmick in the A plot with the animation and the time is so interesting and clever. I feel like it's going to be really memorable down the road in terms of this.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, we started off the season with this, and
the show stands out a lot to me because of its science fiction satire. I don't. I've heard it used be called that. I don't necessarily love calling things satire willy nilly. Like I don't know. Is this satire? Is this satirizing time travel plots? It's just kind of using it straight up to a certain extent, you know.
Yeah.
But its use of the one that always stands out to me is I don't even remember which episode it is, but the Inception parody and going back
Yes.
into the different things with the Freddy whatever his
Freddy Terror.
what I don't yeah that the absurd lengths they went with that character in that episode is so distinctive to me, remembering the first season. And the
No, it's Scary Terry.
Scary Terry, yeah, and the Mr. Meeksies was just really well done. The show does these sci-fi concepts and applies them in such hilarious ways. And I guess this one wasn't there in terms of hilarity, but it was there in terms of like interestingness. To me, the really funny part of this was like the testicle monster, Time Cop guy, right? I think that was the funniest part of it. But yeah, so
That's mainly because he was voiced by what's his name?
Keegan Michael Key. No, it's not. It's not Peele. Peele was the guy at the end. The stinger, the post credits scene.
Oh, okay.
His friend, but it's Key and Peele. This was Key, not Peele. Yeah.
Yeah, no. That's part of why it's just hysterical.
Yeah, and yeah. So I guess I'm hoping for an increase in quality from the rest of the season, because like as great as this is, I know the show can be even better. Like I know that's really high expectations, but this show is legitimately great. And I've heard that the second episode is even better than this. I have not watched it yet. It is out there though.
It exists.
It exists. And yeah, so let's I guess get into some specifics. We talked about the continuity from last season.
Yeah.
There's an article on what did you link to?
The Wired magazine.
Wired magazine, where they talk about how each story this season is not continuous. They're just going to be different stories. And there's a really great interview with Justin Roiland. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, and Dan Harmon and the writing crew and stuff like that on the AV Club, where they talk about how they each want each episode to be a separate jumping off point. They talk about more interesting things than that in that interview. I'd recommend checking that out. But they say each episode should be a jumping off point. Basically, we're not going to see continuous plots here. In the Wired article, they talk about how they're not going to bring back the evil Morty from last season, right? They basically say that. They don't explicitly say it, but like basically the show is not going to have some really interesting long-running plot line that it kind of gets hinted at the end of the first season. Like that, it got pretty interesting, but it seems like they're going to just do separate stuff for this season. Then in the next two ones, maybe they can pull some stuff together, which is kind of annoying as like because the show does have a big fandoms like to those like deep fans of the show, but at the same time, like the show is capable of incredibly high quality individual episodes, so I'm not upset about this.
Yeah, I'm not. And they said like that they do plan on some things being tied up later, which I'm fine with. And though kind of like what I really enjoyed was that like I was just so surprised in season 1 that some things seemed to be linking together, but like that's not what the show is.
Yeah, the end of that first season has such a powerful effect, I think, because just because of how deep it gets and how you don't think it's going there. And then it kind of does, even though it's not actually tying that much together and going into that much of a continuous plot. It just the levels of which their plots range. It's just really, really, I don't know, has an effect. There's a better word for that, but yeah. So back to the specifics for this episode, though. The A plot. The new intro. So the intro in the first season has things that never happen, right? That's the big thing. Like including,
I was trying to mark things off mentally,
including the dad giving birth and stuff like that. These things don't happen. I was
disappointed. I was waiting for that one for a while. Like I was waiting for that one.
And we'll have to watch this new intro a few times to, I guess, get it. I wrote down mole people, robots, robot Mortys. I'm not sure. I don't remember.
It was Robot Rick and Robot Morty, and then Robot Rick like shot him in the face or something.
And then there's a lot of Ricks, and
which is typical. I mean,
and then there's even more stuff than this too. Well, we had the many Ricks before. Yeah, that Rick Council was that the second to last episode of the season?
Something like that. Yeah,
the many Ricks, then the many Mortys and stuff like that. Yeah.
All of the last 3 episodes have like Rick in the title, and it's like what?
Well, all of
not all of them, but
almost all the episodes of the show have Rick in them, including this one.
Including this one.
Although next episode is called Morty Night Run, so Morty not Rick. Interesting. And the third episode this season is called Autoerotic Assimilation. So there you go.
That's gonna be great.
I don't know what that means, but that's
No, it's so good.
Okay.
Such a good.
Yeah, so we talked about how this animation thing. Let's talk specifics of it. The subtleties of Summer and Morty, like, just swapping places in the beginning, that's kind of how it breaks apart. They tie it together in that Morty and Summer are, like, uncertain, and Rick's always very certain of what he does, and, like, that causes time splits. Which, the show has its own rules, but I also think this, like, kind of makes sense in terms of how science fiction often approaches separate timelines, right? It's like all the the common thing you hear is that there's branching universes based off of, and like Doctor Who did this
one
at one
decision.
point. Like any possibilities you have, there's an alternate universe where that happens. So I guess that's what they're talking about with the certainty stuff, and they frame it in a way which is really good for character building or characterization for Rick and Morty and Summer, and it's just really cleverly done. I also like, if this is a parody of this multi-universe type theory, that yes, good, because it's dumb, and everyone thinks it's true, but it's like dumb. But regardless of whether like it checks out science-wise, who cares, right? The show is speaking of this show's universe, by the way, we have to mention the tying to Gravity Falls in the first season. It's not related, but this is just they talk about it in the AV Club interview that I mentioned earlier, and like they send things through the timeline and through the portal in the first season, and it pops out in an episode of Gravity Falls that aired a year later, which is great because Justin Roiland and Alex Hirsch, the two creators of the series, are friends. They posted a tweet. Alex Hirsch tweeted recently with a picture of both of them. They both come from They both come from Fix Hooks, I think, on Cartoon Network.
Yeah.
I think I said this in a previous podcast. Cartoon Network, really like a hotbed of animation talent there. It's pretty impressive. Like Rebecca Sugar coming out of Adventure Time. Adventure Time is a ton of talented people going for it. And apparently Fish Hooks, or I don't know, I'd never watched that show, had just these two, who are two of the most brilliant minds on television right now, honestly. These shows, it's interesting how you to compare Gravity Falls and Rick and Morty, because one's like a quote-unquote children's show and one's pretty obscene, and yet they're pretty similar shows in certain aspects.
Well, I mean, in premise, they're very similar.
Even in premise, yeah.
And just...
It's nice to be talking about both of them, because I feel like they're pretty synchronous shows or whatever, what have you. And okay, I don't know. Any comments on the Gravity Falls tie-in last season? It was just cool, right?
Yeah, it was just, and especially because I was watching them both at the same time.
Oh yeah.
Or I just finished Gravity Falls, and then I started Rick and whatever. I don't remember which order. I think I watched Gravity Falls first, and then I watched Rick and Morty, and I was like, wait, what is that?
Yeah.
So it was cool to do that and like see them both, because I marathoned them both so close together.
You never see these like tie-ins on TV that are this well done and stuff like that. It's just very good. Okay, back to this episode though. We're jumping all over the place. Back to the animation time concept.
Oh, there was something about going back to that, is like the uncertainty. Like there is like an uncertainty principle, and like I enjoyed that. It's kind of like a play on that. I can't remember the guy's name. Like it's a thing in physics, and like the uncertainty principle, and like I just enjoy when things like that happen, and it's great. And of course, it does make sense. And of course, the giant joke at the end, that is amazing.
That is amazing.
Which
I don't think they were making it for
time. So great.
Yeah, the Einstein stinger at the end. I don't think that they're making the episode for that joke. I feel like that came out of it, right?
No, it's just one of those things that it's really funny.
It's just very good, and it ties a lot together, because also Peel gets in there, and it like just makes everything make sense. The other thing I want to mention is Rick fighting himself in the multiple time splits was incredible. That's just such a Rick thing to do, to start thinking yourself is gonna come after you, a different version of him. And then
the delay was beautiful to watch.
The delay?
Like the delay, like when it was about to happen, because like, and away we go, and the other, and then Morty and the other one got sassy. Which,
Morty said, "You mean drunk?" And then that caused him to not press the button right away. Yeah, there's like a few of those. I feel like it's not one of these articles, like, or the review. I also read the review on the AV Club on this, and I'll quote it in a second, which I thought was well done. You can check that out. The review by somebody, Zach Handlin. They have a few good. I've been impressed with the AV Club's quality of the AV Club's coverage of animated series. I think their core coverage was great. Their Steven Universe coverage was great, and their Rick and Morty coverage seems very good too. Also, the Gravity Falls is pretty good too. Okay, so the episode.
Good job.
Good job, AV Club. Rick's fighting himself, yeah, and how it shoots through the frames. I feel like they break the rules a little bit with how he's shooting at himself, and actually the bullets go over the frames and stuff. But it looked really great, and I don't even care if they break the rules in that. And
there's a lot of things like that in different episodes. Where, there's animation flub, but it doesn't matter because it's just great.
Well, it's not even. This is obviously a purposeful thing.
Yeah,
it's an inherent part of what they're doing. What else from this just entire interactions with the different timelines stick out for you? Just the fact that Rick has the various time universes represented with dots on an old monitor. It's such a Rick thing. The show has a pretty distinctive aesthetic. Getting into Sam talk here, of it's just like Rick has this incredibly high-tech technology and stuff. He jumps to varying universes. He's the only one that can do that, yet he's using 80s
Yeah, he's
technology.
stuck in the 80s, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and it feels and looks really cool, and it's like, how is he doing? As a technology guy, it doesn't make any sense to me, but I rarely question it. That's the good thing about the show. The show makes you rarely question its absurdity, I would say.
Well, I think that's it's part of the whole, not, we were talking about, satire. Well, that's kind of the whole, this is all comes from, that's really when sci-fi was, the 80s sci-fi. So, that's really what this is coming from, movies like War Games and things like that. So, I think it's really funny, and, part of that, what's funny about the entire show is that you have him, and then, he's still stuck in the 80s, and, that's a lot of where all these tropes and things begin.
Yeah. The show, on a very broad level, the show comes from a place of, Back to the Future, Doctor Who, and general sci-fi parody, right? I feel like those are the three main factors here. To me, it always seems like mostly a Doctor Who type of parody in terms of at least character interactions. But at the very core of the show, it's Back to the Future, just inherently with the characters, with Rick. And you can see the little pilot that Justin Roiland made of the characters from 2006 or 8 or something, and I don't know if you've seen this, but it's on YouTube. It's incredibly inappropriate, but it's very good.
Good.
And then he went away from it, and then came back to this concept that he made. I'm sure if you YouTube Rick and Morty pilot or something, it would come up. But yeah, and then so we have this entire thing with the varying timelines and the animation interestingness, and then we get I say time cop. I don't think they actually say that on the show, but that's a Gravity Falls thing.
Yes.
Is Tentacle Monster Key Blendin Blandin?
Yes.
Are they the same? Who's better?
Oh, that's such a tough question.
I mean, this guy's much more competent than Lyndon Blandon.
Well, but that's part of Blandon's charm, is that he's completely incompetent.
Yes.
But granted, at the same... Well, I don't know if it's points in his favor or against his favor that Key says ass, an absurd amount of times. It's ridiculous.
It's pretty great, yeah.
My favorite is, the end where he's you ass and ass. Really? Was that necessary?
He says it, 5 times, yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder,
it didn't even make sense.
You wonder if that's improv. I assume it sounds improv, but, a lot of times you don't give the writers enough credit, saying things are improv.
Yeah.
What did I want to say about this? Oh, if this episode is the Rick and Morty version of the Time Traveler's Pig of Gravity Falls, there's a lot of Rick and Morty episodes to play with time, but this, I guess, is the one that's closest to it. That's my favorite episode ever of Gravity Falls. Now, this one I don't think is. I'll take that over this episode, but this episode is also very good.
Yes.
So what do you think of this testicle monster, not tentacle monster, testicle monster, as Summer calls him?
Yes. It's just so funny.
He's so absurd.
He bubbles in that was such a Doctor Who sudden what the hell is this? He just appears, and then
he calls himself omniscient, omnipotent, or whatever being, and
that's omniscient, immortal, and he's I have better. Yeah. He's and that was so funny. He's I'm trying to get up in the world. I'm how can you get better than this?
Yeah, which is the joke. Yeah, and it's
so great.
He's from the fourth dimension, which totally makes sense.
Yes.
I feel that's the concept of him. He's from the fourth dimension. That's time. So you're screwing with time. He would know, and I don't know. It makes me think of blanking on the name, the Inception next movie from him, Yeah, that movie. You know what I'm talking about.
Like,
I don't know if you've seen it, but we could,
vague notion of what you're talking about.
Christopher Nolan, Interstellar. There you go.
Oh,
Interstellar gets into this varying dimensions thing. Kind of spoilers for the end, but I was. I think that Rick and Morty handles the varying dimensions much better than Interstellar does. I don't. You have not seen Interstellar?
Correct.
I feel like you would rage at the ending. A lot of people rage at the end of that movie. Okay.
Maybe I need to watch it so I can yell at it.
You should. I love it though, because I'm a sap for that type of ending in that movie. Yeah, he's this time cop testicle monster guy is just incredible. His gun,
yeah. Chris.
This is Chris. You killed my gun. Yeah, it's just absurd. And the AV Club review points out how Rick is kind of grossed out at the gun, despite the fact that he's so entrenched in all this other weird alien stuff. Yeah. Like, this is the one thing that gets him. That's like absurd. God. Yeah. I guess he's interacted with this fourth dimension species at some point before to steal the crystal.
Yeah. Also, I enjoyed that completely, like, we're so past the point of being shocked that he steals things. It's just
that was very in character, yeah.
Like, duh. Which I guess was kind of like a Doctor Who thing, too, is just kind of being like, yeah, I did this. Who cares?
That is very, very much a Doctor thing to do, yeah.
Like, he's like 9 and 12, like, mixed with I don't know who.
The big difference between Doctor Who, I mean, we're kind of jumping from generalities to specifics, but in Doctor Who, the Doctor's species is like the most powerful thing in the universe. Whereas,
so they're inherently kind of dickish.
Whereas in Rick and Morty, the Doctor's just a dumb human, and he interacts with so many more powerful beings, right? Like, it's an interesting distinction, and it gets a lot of comedy from the fact that the Doctor's just some genius human who, I guess, it's absurd how much smarter Rick seems to be than everyone, but at the same time, It's like kind of a positive feedback loop, and him interacting with them and acquiring more knowledge of the universe and stuff like that. Yeah. They say something about loops in this episode, don't they?
Feedback, yeah, they say feedback loop of like, because they're so uncertain and like, he's like yelling at them.
Yeah,
that's still before the fourth split. I think
I am a fan of feedback loops in theory, so I like mentioning feedback loops. What jokes before we get into the B plot what jokes from the A plot stand out? So I have the red grin grumble of knowing what's going on. And then they start laughing at it, and then Rick's like, I made that up. It's think for yourself, don't be a sheep. This is very much it's as a viewer, like in the whatever one of these 3 articles I have talked about, it seems like they say that this was kind of added at the last minute. This seems like very much a self-referential joke about the show because of him referencing things, and this one to me really works because it's kind of satirizing this show itself, which I think this is a perfect time to do it in the second season introduction.
And it's also just generally funny because like how often does everyone do that like all the time?
Yeah, it's just and I
think it's great.
Morty and Summer would both do that actually, yeah.
And there's a reference with when Fourth Dimension guy appears and Rick's like, he could be the whatever of his universe, and I was like, I have no idea what that is, but it sounds funny.
Oh yeah, there's another reference. I didn't.
Yeah, I don't even. It's David or something. I was like, I don't know who that is, but okay.
I assume we're too young and dumb to know that, but I guess we're Morty in this scenario. And,
yes.
What other? I didn't. I said jokes, and I listed this one joke, and I didn't list anything else.
It was really funny. Like I was just watching it happen. Was like obviously Morty put his shirt on backwards.
Yeah.
Like, duh. And then, like, okay, the dad is just a joke anyway. Like, his entire character is a joke. So everything he does is funny.
Yeah, and him pretending that he knew what was happening. And
and let's start... Oh, no. Well, that's the B plot.
We can talk about the B plot. The guy falling off the roof, and then he's okay at the end, and someone's coming with him in flowers.
It's black roses. She's handing him black roses, and I was like, you don't do that to someone who's alive. That's terrible.
So, it's very morbid humor there with that guy.
In the beginning when she's like, you've dropped so many balls, man. When I saw the trailer for that, I thought she was like, that's a comment people make when they're like, man, that was a good job. Like, you've dropped so many balls. Like, you said that to a guy, and it's like, good job. And I enjoyed, like, because that's what I thought she was talking. I thought she was complimenting him the first time, like, the trailer. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No. What?
Like, when people are like...
No. When did it happen in the episode?
Oh, when it's like literally the beginning of the episode, and she's been like, you've been vacuuming wrong for the past six
Yeah.
months.
How about the concept of them just existing time frozen for 6 months? I don't buy it.
You don't buy it.
I don't buy it. I don't
I mean,
buy how you freeze. I also don't buy how you freeze time for everyone else except you. But the show doesn't make you think about it for that long.
yeah.
Again, in handling its I don't know what you would call it. Well, so let's talk about the B plot. The highlight of the B plot has to be the usage of Cold Stone Creamery.
Yes.
Well,
Let's
the B plot itself is the mom being like doing
typical
surgery on
crazy horse surgeon.
the deer instead of a horse, and all this stuff with the hunter. And it's on its own, it's funny. I think that like in comparison to the A plot, it kind of falls short. I have a quote from the AV Club review. Zach Handlin, I think he does a good job of stating this. I agree with him. My only real reservation with the episode is that while Beth and Jerry's storyline is a lot of fun, it doesn't complement the main storyline. It's a tricky criticism to make because I'm not sure I'd want to see the writers start forcing connections, but the result is two plots which, while great on their own, don't add up to anything more than themselves. A really great entry of the show has multiple plots that tie together in a way that makes them all more interesting. So it's like when you're writing a review of this episode, you can't say like the theme of the episode is this, which is like if you want to satirize current television criticism, talk about how reviewers always try to find the big theme in an episode of television. But you can't do that with this because they have nothing to do with each other.
Well, they do make fun of themselves though, because Rick has that. I'm sure they're stuck in whatever. Like
it does, That's another great joke. Is I forget the exact quote, but Rick referencing them because one of the first season struggles is how to deal with the rest of the family, and a lot of the B plots weren't up to snuff. Although the best one is the Mr. Meeksies, because that wasn't even with Rick and Morty, which was great.
No, it was so good.
I did rewatch that episode before this last night with friends, and that episode's very good. Yeah,
yes,
that episode also has pretty distinctive plot lines, although I think it feels better than this one.
And also takes all of the tropes and just jams them in the trash can. It's great.
Also, that episode's very dark too. This episode much less dark.
Yes.
As dark as the pilot, which you can find on YouTube. Both involve inappropriate things to Morty. Interesting.
Oh god.
I'm not sure which would be darker. That is not a correct discussion now. But it's so I don't know. The B plot, like, it's fine, but
the jokes are great.
The jokes are fine. Overall, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's just it's kind of boring, but very typical of, like, granted, we're getting more of, clearly, like, all Beth cares about is, like, operating on horses, and, like, it's really funny, like, granted, it's the running gag, oh, you're a horse surgeon, ha ha, and then, like, Jerry just being, like, what does Jerry even do? Doesn't he work for, like, an ad agency, and he's constantly ragging on his wife? He works for an ad
agency, yeah.
Like, really? And then, I thought that was, granted, I do like seeing Beth get angry, because, like, in a lot of the first season, she doesn't really do anything. But then, like, in episodes like these, she's like, and she's like, has a character, and you can see where her and Rick are related. Like, wow, crazy runs in the family. That kind of thing.
I mean, I think they're going to do better with Jerry and Beth's characters. Yeah. Beth is interesting.
Beth cracks me
Beth
up,
is more interesting than Jerry as a character, because Jerry's too much the bumbling guy in the beer commercial.
Yes.
And Beth is the competent one, but she has the stuff about uncertainty with her marriage, but there's a lot of genuine moments with her, and I feel like we're going to get some better Jerry stuff, which would be good. This episode was good because it gives Jerry, he is competent at the end with, like, setting up the...
he actually does something.
Yeah, even though it's just absurd, but it's... So let's talk about the real highlight of B-Plot, Cold Stone Creamery.
Oh my god. Let's start at the beginning, though, where first he gives them $500, so he has to be known that his favorite ice cream place is Cold Stone Creamery, and you need $500 to go to Cold Stone Creamery.
So, kind of subtly, satirizing how much that place costs. Talking about Cold Stone, like, first of all, it's like there's like a running joke in my college friend group with Cold Stone, so it's like even funnier to me. But I don't know, just why are they using Cold Stone here? So let's talk. I don't think this episode is sponsored by Cold Stone. That's the thing, because
Is it?
Because Community, like the show Community, the other Dan Harmon show, the past 2 seasons had or I guess season and then the one before, I don't know, because Dan Harmon left at some point. They had a Subway sponsored episode, which is very parodying of Subway, but it's also very clearly sponsored by Subway, and they self-reference that constantly. And then they did it again last season with Honda. But these are ones that are very clearly sponsored by those companies. I'm not sure if Cold Stone sponsored this episode or not.
I highly doubt that Cold
don't
Stone
know.
Creamery.
I probably not, right? Like,
I mean, I don't know. Well, that's the thing when they kept talking about the singing. I have never had anyone sing to me.
no,
at
that's
Cold
so
Stone
that's the
Creamery.
thing. So they say they sing no matter how much they tip. That's
So
the
he
thing.
had to.
If you tip someone at the cultural knowledge, you've tipped someone at Cold Stone, they will sing like in thanks or something. But I don't know if they do that as much anymore. Also, no one
I don't
tips
even know if
them,
that's
so
real.
It was real at one point at least.
But honestly, who's gonna tip at Cold Stone though? Because it costs like $20 to get like 1 cup of ice cream. That's the other thing. Like, so he gave them $500, and then when they're in the car, he's like, "How do we want to spend our $20?" So at first you're like, "Oh my god, they spent $480 buying ice cream," and like that's not even like unrealistic. It's like very exaggerated and hilarious because it's how expensive Cold Stone is. But then she's also like, they'll do it like they'll sing no matter how many times you tip them. So no matter how much you tip them. So it's like, how big of a tip did he give them? Like, but then of course at the end of the episode you're like, okay, so he gave them a lot of money. That's why they felt obligated to like do all this stupid stuff at the end with the lights.
So like on one hand,
Also, when does Cold Stone have a van? Also, like
it doesn't. I guess they have a van to transport ice cream. On one hand, you're explaining the joke, which is bad. On the other hand, that it really does come together, and it's not obvious. So good job explaining
like
all of
it's
this.
so great.
Yeah, that just I don't know, and the rum raisin that joke is
It's
really
rum
bad.
raisin.
That might be the show's lamest joke ever. I will say that.
To be fair, it was said by Jerry, and Jerry
Who's
is
the
like
dad? Yeah.
and he's like the lamest person,
Yeah.
so like it's okay.
What else happens with Cold Stone here, other than the ice cream lights? That made no sense.
I was like, what? Maybe that's a joke of how dimly lit Cold Stone Creamery
I don't know.
is.
I did not take anything profound away from that. That
I
just
don't
seemed absurd.
Like, Cold Stone Creamery lights. Well, I guess maybe it's because like ice cream would melt. I don't know.
The stuff with the surgeons or the vets inside there, and the lawyer and the
So
hunter.
bad.
Like I feel like there's a plot of an entire episode which is about like hunting laws and like legitimizing this terrible thing, right? And that's kind of what they're satirizing, but they do it in like 2 minutes. I don't understand.
It felt very much like a kind of like a really dumb Law and Order episode.
Yeah, which I guess is what they're going for too. The highlight to me is the vet saying that she takes an oath that no animal comes to harm except in her listing everything ending with
Eating them with every meal.
Eating them with every meal, which is I think hit home with the audience here of 2 vegetarians, right?
Yes.
we were very much in favor of this line.
Yeah, it was really great. And oh god, it was really
euthanizing,
funny.
and they list other stuff too. Yeah, that was great.
It's like euthanizing, and then like she even mentioned like putting them in a kennel.
Let's satirize vets themselves, which is kind of what we're doing with the entire character of Beth, but even more so here.
It's a horse heart surgeon. Like that is like the most specific thing.
Even more so here, yeah. And just the laws with the hunter.
What are they doing to that snake? Like,
yeah, I don't know what they're doing.
it looked like they were taking like its blood pressure, but I'm like, why do we need to know the snake's blood pressure?
Do vets have nurses? Is that a thing?
That's another. See, I don't know.
I don't know either.
That's my nurse. They were okay. Really, they were making fun of like an episode of like ER. That's what was going on.
Yeah, but I don't. It's like when we talk about it, like the B plot had a lot going for it. I think.
Yeah.
But I just think in conjunction with the A plot, it doesn't come together great. Like that quote I read said. Yeah.
Well, and then although I think the best part of the B plot was the lawyer going like, "Give in to the dark side, Beth." Like.
Yeah, I don't.
Like, the lawyer literally had devil horns. It's like what his hair looked like. It was great.
He was, yeah.
It was like
an absurd character. I will say, I actively did not like the. You have to state your incompetence at the end of that. I feel like that didn't land for me, like that joke.
Well, I think the only point of that was like to like lead you, not so you'd be like, Jerry's an idiot. Good job, Jerry.
Yeah.
And then be like, oh, Jerry actually did something right for once.
Yeah, that was the down point. This show is constant highs in terms of whether it's being clever, whether it's being funny, whether it's being interesting. Like,
Yeah.
and so whenever there's like a slight downturn, like that joke in a episode of any other adult animated show except for maybe Archer, which I also think very highly of and will cover regularly when it comes back in next year, is like normal. But in this show, everything's great. So the slight downturns stand out, I say. What else from the B plot?
Oh, the hunter, and like the moment where he's like, I've decided not to eat it, and I'm like, what is gonna happen? And then he's like, I've decided just to put it on my rec room wall.
Yeah.
So it was kind of making fun of like, I'm laughing, but like the fact that it was making fun of like, obviously we would both prefer that the hunter didn't like kill the deer and like all this stuff, but like it's also making fun of the whole like, oh, I've seen the error of my ways, and this is really unrealistic of how I've changed my mind.
This episode kind of is simultaneously like slams hunters and like the absurdity of the concept of him, and at the same time humanizes them because of how serious and like kind of intelligent he is. It's like you definitely don't expect that from. They're definitely playing with tropes with hunters. I guess this is a good time to talk about briefly social issues and Rick and Morty, because this is like the closest the show comes, I feel like, this plot to being socially conscious, like that big joke with the treatment of animals, and on the other hand, they had that, and they also had the characterization of the hunter, who they're not really making an overall statement on. I would say it's they satirize hunting as a concept and how dumb it is, but at the same time, they also humanize him, right? So I don't think it comes away with any sense of overall social position. Obviously, the show is not intending to take social stances on things.
No.
I feel like that is viewed as a negative in the comedy, television, whatever, industry, all of these, which to me is not good. Right. But at the same time, is the show socially not progressive, right? So another thing they have in this episode is the fruit joke, right? So the dad says at the end when they're making fun of the goggles, that was another good scene we didn't talk about, by the way.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's fruity, but not in a homophobic way.
Yeah, he was like, clean up in the fruit aisle, but...
Yeah, so ultimately what they end up saying from that is that they were satirizing people who use that and claim not to be homophobic when they actually are saying something homophobic. But again, the show itself is not actually commenting on this social issue at all, right? It's kind of just being neutral towards things. And the reason we want to talk about this is because as a podcast, I feel like we're kind of being known for talking about things that never get talked about in a social issues context. Someone emailed us recently saying, I love how you talk about I think Travis said, I love how you talk about things. Travis said, I love how you apply an element of social critique to your analysis. I think people are often too hesitant to analyze animated works on that level because of a perception that animation is for children and children's art should be exempt from social politics. And he says that's bad and we're good for doing that. Which I think is like, but on the same time, now we're not talking about a children's show, but this is also something that's never not analyzed socially. So like, it's like, should you feel bad for watching Rick and Morty? Right? I asked this about Gravity Falls at one point because it's the same thing. It's a very male-dominated show. It's made by all men, and it's mostly male main characters. There's no diversity. It's all white. They're all straight, right? So. Yeah. Is this a negative, or do they have to function within this heteronormative reality to achieve satirization? You feel me?
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to like.
There's not an easy answer to it because I feel like there's a legitimate view that they have to make the characters this suburban white heterosexual family, or else they can't satirize the suburban white heterosexual family. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's kind, and by the same token, these like the jokes, like the like I think the most important thing to get out of the whole like B plot, like if we're gonna talk from social standpoint, it was a joke, but like the line, like the animal treatment line from the vet, like it was a joke, but at the same time, like it wasn't played the way the hunter plot was. Like she just said it. And it was kind of like, well,
that was the closest that I've ever felt the show to making a stand on something, because they don't go back on it. It's just it stands. The line stands, and they move on.
And it's kind of like in this way, like this and the fruit joke are kind of like an opposite to like, for example, like Minions and like the jokes that are like, oh, you laughed at it because we've been like pretty much like trying to train to laugh at things like that, to think they're funny. And something like this, like, it's funny, but it's also funny because like it's wrong and messed up, and that's why it's funny, because like the homophobic joke, like, oh yeah, that's funny because people do that. And but also it's these jokes, I think, I don't want to say they're neutral. Like, obviously the show isn't taking a stand, but by the same token they're the opposite of a joke that is like for example, like cross-dressing jokes. Like, those are in everything, and they're awful. And
so you think, basically, I think what you're saying is, even though they're not intentionally being whatever, and they are really just not taking a stand because they kind of walk back on it, by having that as a source of humor in the show, they're further perpetuating the bad thing in society, I'm saying the discrimination or whatever, right?
I'm saying Minions does what you're saying.
You're saying this show doesn't do that.
I'm saying, like, but this is still, like, I'm gonna put in air quotes, good thing. I'm not still very 100% on the homophobic joke, because at first I was like, I don't know, like, at first I didn't know what they were making fun of. I was like, for a second I was like, wait, is it, like, I wasn't sure which way to take it. And, like, but usually, like, when we'd have a joke like that, we wouldn't get the whole, but not in a homophobic way part.
Yeah.
And then,
well, so okay. Okay, so yeah, let's talk a bigger one, because let's talk the Mr. Meeksies episode. Getting back to that. Trigger warnings for rape and sexual abuse, which I think that episode should have before the episode starts. Honestly, I mean, there's like, oh, should college classes come with trigger warnings? Yes, because these people can have negative experiences from hearing about this, and someone shouldn't just be watching Rick and Morty and then have to see this whole plot about Morty being abused by this fictional absurd character who ends up being the king of that city. And that was incredibly funny, like, to me, but also I'm not someone who would have that happen in a negative way to them. Have that apply in a negative way to them. So that one, I feel like, is what we should be talking about if we're talking about Rick and Morty and social issues. Is that I feel like it's hard not to see that and say that it's like, obviously on one hand that joke is making making a comment on the function of sexual abuse, and even, I don't know, towards minors in general in our society. Maybe it's saying that through satirization, it's saying that rape culture is real. So even if it has a positive stance on it, it still has this humorous depiction of something that really affects people in a negative way, though.
Yeah.
So, like, how can we say that the show is socially progressive or even socially neutral when it does that?
Yeah. And then I do think it's also hard to analyze, like, this. I don't want to call it, like, humor, because you were talking about, we hesitate to call this satire. Well, it's like, and that's, granted, this is also something on them, and, like, how do they want us to take it when they represent it this way? Do you, like...
Yeah, so I think the answer is that the creators of this, Dan Harmon, Justin Roiland, and the writers, I don't think they care. That's basically what I would say.
Yeah. But I don't think they're, like, I don't take these jokes as, now, granted, the king, that one was different. I was very, like, what is going on? This took a turn.
I mean, like, so here's the thing with the king and the Mr. Meeksies episode. I thought that was really funny, but that also says something about me, that I'm capable of thinking that's funny, right? It's very much functions within our perceptions of society.
Yeah.
And like I feel like there's a place for Rick and Morty. And it's you have to understand that the show could potentially be socially bad, some noun form of bad that's a more complex word that makes me sound more intelligent, even though it's satirizing it and trying to bring things to light in society. It's still made by the establishment about an establishment, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And the audience, its audience is the establishment as well. It's going to be 20s male, and they're not going to understand that them making fun of this rape thing, they're not going to take it the same way as maybe it was intended, or maybe they are going to take it how it was intended, which would be bad. So, like, overall, the show is probably, from a social issue standpoint, detrimental. That's what I was looking for to society. I think I don't know how you don't argue that given the contents of the show, and yet we're talking about it here in a very socially progressive podcast.
Well,
First of all, I should say that it doesn't counteract the incredibly high critical quality of the show. Like, the show is great. Also, it's probably detrimental to society from a very broad perspective.
Yeah. Well, I want to classify that the two jokes in this episode are very different than what, like, I would say in severity, and because what I was saying about the other two jokes was that they weren't your typical, like, you know, terrible, like, this isn't funny, like, why are we still making jokes like that? It was pointing out that jokes like that aren't funny. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's
and that's what's funny about it.
You could say this episode that we're talking about, season 2, episode 1, is not detrimental to society at all, and that's fine.
I definitely think that these, like, that's what I think. That's part of the thing with Rick and Morty, is that we're dealing with, like, not necessarily, like, kind of like two types of humor. Like, we're still struggling with the whole, like, shows like Family Guy and things like that, where it's like these, like, we've been, like, conditioned to think some of these things are funny, and they're not funny. Like, they're detrimental to society, and it's awful. In an episode like Mr. Meeseeks, and then...
So you put the Meeseeks episode with the Family Guy side, who isn't satirizing the society aspect, but the jokes in this, like the fruit joke, is satirizing homophobia in society. So it's fine here, but not fine there, right? Basically is what you're saying.
Yeah, which, granted, I do think there's a part of Mr. Meeseeks that, for me, was, like, a bit deeper than the, like, when, Rick, he doesn't talk to Morty about it, but it's clear that he knows what happened, and it's a conscious, and you can take it either way. And granted, that's another thing, this is a topic that is sensitive, and it's different for everyone, and it's a very private matter, and that kind of thing. And, like, he doesn't approach Morty, but he clearly, like, but when he figures it out, he's like, yeah, we can leave right now, or, like, we're going to do what you want to do, Morty, and that kind of thing, which I think that's kind of a good thing.
So I think you can argue that the Mr. Meeseeks episode, you also need to, also the pilot is another one to take into account here, is you can argue that these are intended to not be detrimental, right? Like, you can argue that they're coming from a good place with them, and I think that's fine if you want to argue that. I also think that the applications, based on the audience and who watches it would be hard to think that they would understand this.
Well, it's hard in general with a show like this to, like, and like you said, like, comedy, like, they don't handle these things well because of, traditionally, comedy is a lot of source of things that get perpetuated because, like, you've been conditioned to think it's funny and it's not funny. So,
okay, but backing up for a second, a lot of people, if anyone's listening to this who's outside our typical audience, they probably rage quitted by now, but it's like, I understand that me and Delaney are talking from a perspective on the world in which you care about moral correctness, not first, but always as a factor. There's never any amorality, even when talking about a show like this. And I think that should be how you view the world, or else you're inviting bad morality into it. Amorality being a lack of morality. Most people would say this show is just amoral. It's not supposed to say anything. And I think for the most part that is what the creators would say. It's not trying to necessarily comment on anything. It's just really funny, really clever, amoral. And like I said, like, there's kind of a place for this. But at the same time, who else would call this show out on it while still loving it, if not for us? Like, I don't think anyone else in the entire world would do this. At the same time, something that's amoral can still have negative consequences. Like, just a lot of the current online community, like the Reddit 4chan type things, even if this is just a place to turn the moral blinders off, when there are consequences for this amorality, then you can have negative effects in society. And I think that you should not ignore the fact that shows like this, and this is like the good amoral show, talking Family Guy and that type of bad humor, that's the negative effects of it. And not to specifically call it Family Guy, I think a lot of people, including Mel, would argue that
and Family Guy isn't, like, there are some episodes of Family Guy, and, like, I wouldn't necessarily classify all of Family Guy, but Family Guy has a lot of examples of, like, poorly done, like, humor in this aspect.
And yeah, I think it's
Like,
hard
I was
not to argue.
expecting Mel to
Maybe
be
Family
like,
Guy transcends its incredibly dumb, make fun of people type thing sometimes, but a lot of times it doesn't. And just that type of show, that's kind of what I'm saying.
I think using Family Guy as an example is like a good like, oh, that's like good like this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I guess back to the question. Yeah, it's not specifically that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Back to the question of like, so should Rick and Morty be different from what it is? And I think that's not clear, even as social as in quotes, because this is an absurd term, as social justice warrior we are on this podcast. I wouldn't even say that the show should change. I think it's ambiguous, right? Like that's why I want to discuss it though. And I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to say the show would be anything but not socially progressive because of the two white male heterosexual as far as creators of the show. At the same time, there still can be a lot of brilliance from it, obviously. But it just should be noted, and we don't need to get this deep every week with the show. No. But it's our first one, and it should be noted about this. And I wonder if there's because I feel like there's a lot of people who would say that because of like the Mr. Meeks episode that we should not cover this type of thing on a socially progressive podcast. And I'm not going to say that's not true. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. I honestly, I'm someone who very much feels like they understand morality and how the world works, unlike almost everyone else, which sounds very full of myself, but believe me, that's the only thing I would say that about in terms of myself, knowing how things work. I am not sure of how to apply that in this situation, because the show is like mostly intelligent and not unprogressive, but like sometimes not, and I don't know.
Well, it's also hard because a lot of the episodes, like, we're dealing with, the majority of it are sci-fi parody episodes, and, like, honestly, this episode and Mr. Meeseeks, I mean, right now are the only two episodes I can think of where we actually have, like, instances of this. Like, there's...
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the first season. We'll get into it as it goes, I guess, but...
Yeah, but, like, there's certain, like, these, like... It's hard to think of, like... this isn't something that comes up all the time, and, especially in an episodic format, it's, like, it's kind of difficult to... Because we don't have like the typical like gag awful humor like constantly, so it's like
you're right. We may be overstating this. We may be saying the only examples of it. Honestly, I watched the first season almost a year ago. Right, I don't fully remember.
And that's part of why we both like the show is because we're not like immediately offended by the humor.
Yeah,
so
that's true. It's not. I mean, like there's. Like the jokes, yeah. My impression of the show is always that the jokes are more towards the fruity joke in this episode, right? Like it's always like parodying the offensive people themselves, which is much more appealing to me than the other thing, right?
Yeah, which that's more borderline, like you would say, progressive than Mr. Meeseeks.
Yeah.
So. It's hard to evaluate at this point.
Yes.
And like just most of the episodes deal with sci-fi tropes, so it's like we don't like. I mean, we'll see where this episode takes us, and we'll rewatch and be like, well, I don't know, like, are these the only two instances, or
basically, I would say I think we made a pretty good argument here, where we ended up in favor of treating the show legitimately, actually, despite the fact that we heavily criticized it. And I mean, feel free to tell me otherwise. I feel like the problem is if you don't think that the show is good, then you're not going to be listening now. But not critically good, but like societally good. And I mean, maybe it shouldn't be talked about in this context. I feel like we made a good argument that it should be legitimized. I'm not saying it's progressive. It's no Steven Universe. I would say it's on the Gravity Falls side of things in terms of focus is very heteronormative and is dangerously close to going past the Gravity Falls side of things, right? But overall, I would say no, probably. That's no, probably is what I would say. And we will further evaluate as we get more a higher sample size.
And it's also another thing, these jokes in this episode specifically came from, like, Jerry.
Who is the male in a beer commercial, right? So
yeah, so it's like...
Yeah.
So it's nothing. It's like taking in context of the jokes, like what character said them. Because, like, for example, we talk about Cora all the time, and like Varric being like the most sexist character.
Yeah, well, that was during the period where Cora. I did argue that Cora was overall sexist, but
yeah.
It's also I just remembered the show has the female-dominated alien episode. Yes. I don't even know what statement that was making about anything. Right? I don't think it was saying anything.
I mean, as a female, I enjoyed that episode.
Like, what is it commenting on anything? I don't know. I don't think so.
I mean, it's it's another thing. It's also because, like, that's also a sci-fi trope, which is inherently sexist because it comes from a place where it's like, oh, we have to have an episode or a world where women rule because LOL, that's not here. So, like, it's one of those, like, kind of hard to talk about, kind of topsy-turvy kind of things because it comes from a place that is inherently sexist.
So that goes back to the, if you're gonna parody heteronormativity, you have to have heteronormativity, right? So just in the case that the show is satirical, then it has to function within these realms sometimes. And and in that regard, it doesn't have a choice what its subject matter is, right? It's covering trodden ground or whatever.
And then of course the entire female-dominated episode was like ruined by a fart joke. So that's another, like, I don't know.
I don't remember that. Maybe I blocked that out. Yeah, okay. Well, we might need to revisit that one. That episode's kind of perfect for this podcast, actually.
Yes, I agree.
We can. I remember thinking that episode was quite good, but we can talk about it later. Okay. I feel like let me know if you have any thoughts on this. I don't even know how many people are going to listen to Rick and Morty podcast in the first place, but if you have thoughts on this entire 20-minute discussion, this is the theme now of this podcast. We talk for like half an hour about the actual content matter, and then we talk about social issues for another half an hour. That's what me and Mel have done on like every one of ours, and it continues no matter who we have on, as we see now. It is a broader,
like calls delight,
overly animated thing about us, I guess. Okay, so let me know comments on this. I feel like we talked about it pretty intelligently. I'm very happy with that. So back to Rickle in Time.
Thanks, Dylan.
Overall, Delaney, would you agree with me that this is a very, very good, not one of the best episodes of the show?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, I liked it, but I mean, it's definitely not like heads and shoulders above like anything else.
To me, this is like there's like the top tier, and then there's like the next tier, and this is the next tier plus because it has that incredibly interesting thing going for it. Yeah, with the split screen stuff they do. And I mean, like I said, I actually do expect more from the season, which is dangerous, as we've seen with me and Steven Universe right now. Animation is so good on television right now. This show, Steven Universe, Gravity Falls, it's very dangerous to have these high expectations because what shows consistently are as good as Rick and Morty? Almost nothing. But I need it to be even better for me to get what I get out of the show.
We had it for Cora Book 3, so I'm gonna have hope.
Cora Book 3 is, I mean, I don't know how many people, probably everyone who's listening to this podcast listen to Cora because that's our only audience so far. But yeah, Cora Book 3 is the example. Like, what shows achieve that level of consistent quality? Almost none. This show has the potential to do so. At the end of season 1, it did do that. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on this episode or Rick and Morty?
I didn't appreciate it until I watched it the second time through. Was that like if you go, it's like when the fourth dimension guy was like, yeah, the place with the dinosaurs. If you hit the dolphin people, you've gone too far.
People have gone too far. Yeah.
Obviously, I'm stupid because I forgot that it's a being in time. I was like, oh, he's looking for the planet Earth. No. Because I got it the second time through when he finally shows up. It's because, like, apparently, this reminds me of Doctor Who, where it's like the lizard people were the original inhabitants of the Earth. So apparently, sometime in our future, the dolphins will take over the Earth.
Yes, that is what that joke is saying. Yes, he's traveling time, not distance. Yeah.
So, like, for anyone else, I mean, I hope no one's as dumb as I am because I was like, oh.
There's a lot going on in this episode. I don't know if that was one of the more complex ones, but
I mean, I enjoyed it simply because it was just like, what? Oh, dolphin people.
Yes, no, that was one of the better jokes of the.
And I had to share that I was stupid, so because I didn't get it.
You don't need to bring up most people hide when they're stupid. They don't actively bring it up.
I mean, in case anyone else happened to have that flip.
What any other things we didn't talk about?
I I feel like we're different talking in this format because we're not breaking down literally every second of the episode.
Yeah, which I prefer not doing.
Yes, because it doesn't last.
I thought
hours.
that I was worried we would only have 15 minutes of discussion, but we have gone over an hour, so fears assuaged there. I don't think we'll do this. I think we're going to be 30 minutes for the rest of the episodes this season, probably.
Because we're not going to. I mean, this is a hopeful and a not hopeful thing that we're not going to have like the like social talk every episode.
Unless the show does a Mr. Meeksies type thing with Morty, right? There were like something that stands out. Like we're not going to have to do it about these little jokes in this one because, like as we concluded, they're not actively bad. Probably the jokes in this episode,
unless you do something really great, and then it'll just be like yes,
something like very socially, like it did with the animal treatment line. Honestly, like that stood out to me. Also, we're biased. We're the biased audience here, but yeah,
we're super biased.
Okay. Anyway, let me know if you listen to this whole thing. I do think there are a few people who listen to this who also watch Rick and Morty. We'll see what our numbers are. Anyway, I'm Dylan Hysen. That's Delaney Stovall. Where can we find you, Delaney, online?
Guru Korasami on Tumblr.
Yes.
And
Delbari S on Twitter. Or did you change it? That's
still it. It's pronounced Delbury, but that's how you spell it.
Well, okay. Yes, spelling is the important.
Yes.
One. And you recently what?
Discovered Rick and Morty fan art, not fan fiction. Oh god, I don't want to know about that. Fan art. So if you follow me, you'll get to see cool fan art because
Rick and Morty following on Tumblr. That's an interesting combination. What do you ship in Rick and Morty?
Oh god,
there are no ships in the show. There are actually no ships.
Good.
We've discovered a shipless show.
Great. We're in a safe place because no one ships Beth and Jerry.
Yeah, I guess you can ship Beth and Jerry, but like I don't.
But I don't think anyone does.
I don't want to ship Beth and Jerry. Yeah.
Because everyone's like, Jerry, can you not?
Yeah. It's okay.
Oh, this is something for later. No, actually, no, I'll just mention this after. Never mind. Ignore me.
Okay, great. That you pulled a Sam. Good job. I'm welcome. Dylan OVA on Tumblr and Dylan_OVA on Twitter, and you can find out everything about this podcast at overlyanimated.com. You can support our Patreon. If you liked if you actively enjoyed the entire hour of this podcast, you might be someone who would think about contributing to our Patreon.
Maybe.
That's what I would say. On patreon.com/overlyanimated. Huge thank you to our current patrons, Nate, Cordell, Shayna, Beatriz, Mitch, Nathan Fillion, Cordell University, Heyna, Beatrix Lestrange, and Fever Mitch. You can get a cool, quote-unquote cool nickname like this by supporting our Patreon and other rewards, including the monthly Patreon exclusive podcast, which I am not sure when we're going to do. It's presumably at the end of the month, but Patreon works with their months weird. It's like the beginning of the month, the end of the month, so maybe we'll wait for the beginning of the month. I don't know. And yeah, another thing you can do if you want to be really nice is leave us a review on iTunes. I think we have 4, and they're all pretty positive so far, so thank you guys. And
do you want a message to be like, if you listen to all of it to the end?
I mean, just tell me if you listen to this entire thing. Send me an ask on Tumblr or email us. Our email address is on overlyanimated.com, because I do kind of want to know. I suspect no one will. That's my prediction. No one will do it. So prove me wrong.
Do you want to have like a code?
Well, the code the code would have to be messaged to me anyway, because I'm not going to like check the hashtags on Twitter for it.
That's a good point.
Yeah, or you can add us on Twitter. At us. That's not. You can tweet at us. That's the actual way to say it on Twitter as well. Anyway, I think that's it. Delaney, anything else? Good?
Nope. Good.
Yes, I think I'm very happy with this, actually. I didn't think it would be. We're going to be covering the second episode next week. We'll be recording it ahead of time because I'm going to be on vacation. So it works out that this leaked so we can do it ahead of time.
Thanks,
also, it's the same night as Gravity Falls. Or not. This is Sunday night. Gravity Falls was Monday night, but it'd be like the same thing.
Yeah.
So that's a lot. 2 podcasts next Monday. There you go. Anyway, that's all. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time. Yay, bye. Say bye again. We didn't hear you.
Bye.